Hi, everybody. So we will slowly get started and expect that people tune in. I am Sonia Wadman. I am the Executive Director of the Waltham Land Trust, and I am thrilled to have Candace Curry here to talk to us about green burial. This is a really interesting subject that I admit I don't know very much about. So I'm looking forward to becoming educated and having you guys join me in this journey of finding out other earth-friendly options for our final resting place. So I am going to share my screen and just talk a few things about, or just go over a few things here. If I can. All right, great. Okay, so here we are. We are having our Green Burial, the Earth-Friendly Option Zoom with Candace of Green Burial, Massachusetts. Okay, thank you. All right, so like I said, I'm Sonia. I'm the Executive Director of the Waltham Land Trust. Just a few words about our group. Our mission is to promote, protect, restore, and acquire open space. We're very much like a friends group. We have activities throughout the year, every month. Usually 2 programs, generally a walk or a Zoom and a fundraiser. And we do a good amount of advocacy. We have a group that's helping us save Waltham's wildlife. Where the Save Waltham Wildlife folks are focused on ending the use of escars, which are poisons that unfortunately have a end result in a lot of our raptors and our natural predators dying from them. Anyway, so we do advocacy. Of course, our main mission is to save land and restore land and get people outside. So these are the things that we do. We're a membership group, which means that ideally folks pay us dues once a year. And it's only $25 for an individual or $50 for a household. We also have a Living Lightly rate of $15, which is you get the same benefits as an individual, as a regular membership. It's just $15. And your dues help us pay for our fabulous presenters like Candace. And we've had folks present about changing your turf lawn into a meadow and using native plants. We've had folks talk about birds. And also when we have our in-person programs, we have hired mycologists to help us look for mushrooms. So we need money sometimes to pay for our programs. We also are having to pay for tools for our volunteer trail and land restoration stewards. We have campaigns to save and to actually buy land. This is a new initiative of ours that we've been blessed to be able to purchase some very small properties on Hardy Pond, on the shores of Hardy Pond. So we're looking to expand our empire. And of course, we always have to print trail guides, because even though they're on our website, walthamlandtrust.org, people like me like to have paper maps, and we pay for staff and our office space, and there's a lot of other stuff. So please consider joining us. Plus members get our newsletter, which comes out twice a year, where we go in depth into the people and the programs and the history of our lands and all the stuff that we're doing. So you learn more in depth about what we do at the Waltham Land Trust. And then occasionally we charge fees for our ticketed events, like our major galas, which includes the Green Space Blues Jam, which this year is on Friday, May 16th. So members get a small discount on those things. But something that's not here, and it should be, is that you feel great about being part of a movement of the folks in Waltham and in our area who care about saving land and care about the future. And a big thing, you don't need to be from Waltham to be a member or to be involved. I'm actually a Newton resident, and a lot of our supporters and members are from our neighboring towns. So please consider joining us. You can do so at walthamlandtrust.org, or you could just make a donation if you just want to give us a little money. That'd be great. So some of our upcoming events are our spring equinox fundraiser at the Chateau. That'll be on the equinox, which is Thursday, March 20th. And if you just go to the Chateau, that amazing Italian-American restaurant that everybody loves on School Street, and tell them that you're part of the Waltham Land Trust, make sure that fundraiser is on your bill, then we get 20% of your sale. And you can also order online or call in and order. And we have instructions on how to do that to make sure that we get 20% of your sale on our website. On April 5th, we have our annual stewards training, which is free. So if you or members of your family or your neighbors or friends would like to help us pick up litter and restore landscapes by removing invasive plants and planting natives in their place, we would love to have you involved with our program. So our stewardship training is going to be on the 5th, and it's with Ranger Adam. He's awesome, and he will take us into the field at Prospect Hill Park, and he'll show us things. And then there's some in classroom presentations that I go through. So it's a good time. And actually it starts off with lunch, which is included. So think about joining us on the 5th. And then later on that month, on the 26th, is our huge cleanup along the Charles. This is a very popular event, picking up litter or moving invasives. Individuals or smaller groups meet at Shaw's, but if you're part of a larger group and you maybe want to have your own section to clean with just your team, you can email me and I can assign you to a separate section. So information about all these events and others are on our website, walthamlandtrust.org. You can sign up for all of these things right now. So on to the show. This program is being recorded and it will be on our YouTube channel. I will let you guys all know when that is. It might take a few days or a week or so, so please be patient. Thanks. Keep yourselves muted, please, to avoid background noise. And please put your questions in the chat. Diana Young, who is a board member of ours, and she's the chair of the Land Trust Program Committee, she and I are going to monitor the chat and try to keep track of the questions and ask them all of Candace at the very end so she's not disturbed while she's going through her presentations. And on that, let's try to keep the chat like focused on questions. It can be kind of distracting if people are chiming in here and there. So I'd appreciate it if you could try to limit your enthusiasm slightly and just try to put questions in the chat, but it's all good if you don't. Okay, so about Green Massachusetts Burial, they are a statewide organization whose guiding principle is to restore death to its rightful, and actually I have to move this, I can't read it because my thing, you can read what it is. It's very important, but their mission, and I know, of course, Candace is going to tell us all about it, is to start the first green cemetery open to all in Massachusetts and to educate the public about green burial. So thank you so much, Candace, for joining us. You can unmute yourself, and then I will mute myself, and we'll go on with the show. So I'm going to, okay, good. There we are. And
okay, can everybody hear me? And Diana, I'm dependent on you to tell me if you can't hear me because I can't see everybody now that I'm looking at a presentation.
Excuse me, Candace. Now it's interesting. I'm seeing more than just the slide. Do you have it on slideshow?
Let's try this again.
We just went through this, guys, before we let you in from the waiting room. We promised we had it all queued up. And
what about now?
No, same. I mean, we could say the slide is the main thing, but your notes will be visible, I suspect. So
maybe display settings. If you click under that display settings up towards the top, or
hang on, I'll just do it. Now you're just seeing the slide, yes?
Yes, victory.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here and to be able to talk about the earth-friendly option for green burial, particularly with a land trust. So I'm thrilled to have so many land trusters on this Zoom call as well. And I'm not a land trust person. I did work for Mount Auburn Cemetery for about 20 years. So I love big open spaces that also can be used as cemeteries. So I'm thrilled to be here today. And let's get going. So as Sonia said, we are a nonprofit run by volunteers, a 501c3, which means we provide education and we do charitable work. Part of these things are public presentations, including we often get asked by local health departments if we might want to talk to them because they're trying to do burials in their town. And we also maintain a cemetery database that is crowdsourced of cemeteries in the state that allow green burial. And back in 2019, we thought we were really close to finding something called a conservation burial ground. And at that point, we established what's called a 501c13, which is a private nonprofit cemetery entity. We don't yet have that land, but we're still looking for it. Tonight, we'll take a little historical view, what is and why green burial, types of green cemeteries, a little bit about the movement. And even though we focus on green burial of the human body, we also get questions about cremation and a couple other options. So we will also mention those and other cost-related things related to green burial. Prior to 1860, it's been typically women who were the midwives or church members or other family members took care of the loved one who died. They washed the body and clothed the body. And that's when there was this thing called a home parlor. They were the people it looks like a funeral parlor, but it was in the home. It was a room in the home. In the 1860s, the Civil War happened. And also that was the rise of the undertakers, the funeral directors. In the 1930s, vaults became a new thing to help protect your loved one theoretically forever. And the question really is, what are they trying to protect you from? So we'll mention those. And in 1998, here in the States, in Ramsey Creek, South Carolina, started the first burial ground on conserved land. Today, we have almost 20 of these types of cemeteries, and there's still fabulous areas to go to for both burial and solace. So in the 1860s, we had the Civil War. Surgeons actually would set up a camp, a tent, up on a battlefield, and soldiers from the North, if they died on the battlefield, they had their name tucked into their pocket so that people would know where to send this body home to. And they actually got embalmed with arsenic on the battlefield. And this was the beginning of the funeral industry, so that families who lived in the North could actually see their loved one before he was put into the ground. As a result of that, we also have now replaced the home parlor with the funeral parlor. And it has a similar look and feel with the flowers and the photographs. But this was the rise of the funeral industry in the 60s through the 30s. And it's still very prevalent today, as we all know. And it was the death of Lincoln that really made embalming here in the States recognized as something that was good for the dead, because it allowed people to have that picture perfect image of somebody after they had died, so that you could remember somebody with that view in your mind. You know, Lincoln's body also traveled from DC to New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, all the way to Illinois. And he was also embalmed with arsenic, which was a common chemical at that time. And cemeteries within Canada and the United States. In 2015, we had somewhere around 100 cemeteries that would allow natural burial. happy to report we're close to 400 cemeteries now all across the country that allow natural burial. And here in New England, we're looking at about 100 cemeteries, and these were as of a year ago. And I just want to point out this source, New Hampshire Funeral, nhfuneral.org. A woman named Lee Webster is virtually the writer and editor and collaborator of lots of information about green burial. If you ever want to find something, try going to nhfuneral.org and you'll succeed. So why might someone choose green burial? We are part of nature, so we respect the habitat. We respect harmony with nature. It has a smaller carbon footprint. And typically, now this depends on the cemetery, but we can also personalize the ceremony. We may still have the preacher or our religious figure from our church, but it doesn't always have to happen that way. So there's usually some more variety in what is a green burial. And it's also typically more affordable. So all these things can be part of a green burial and why people might choose one. And what is it? Really simply, everything going into the ground is biodegradable. So if you're wearing fleece pants right now, those probably aren't biodegradable. So don't get buried in your fleece pants. But some hallmarks of green burial include no embalming. Embalming is not required by law, so you do not have to be embalmed. No vault. That means there's no casket for the casket that's going into the grave. A biodegradable container, perhaps a bed of organic materials like some pine boughs or hemlock boughs at the bottom of the grave. And the earth has been feeding us our whole lives. And so we as human beings can give a little bit of ourselves back to the earth. And it's also true that families participate more in green burials than they do in a conventional burial. And a friend of mine describes, grief as a full body experience. And my experience has been when people participate, whether it's lowering the body or decorating a casket, it's comforting. It provides solace for you in the grieving process. So that's another reason to think about green burial is the solace that you can find from it. And it's simpler. Some of those containers might be a soft pine casket, a cardboard casket, wicker, or a simple shroud. And because it includes the family and friends, it really is a way to lay somebody to rest. In this particular case, these people are lowering their loved one into their ground. It often may include walking the casket over to the gravesite. Opening means somebody digging the grave. Closing the grave means putting the shovel of dirt over the casket. Placing flowers. Maybe there's a ritual from your family that you get to include in a location like this. And for natural burial grounds, sometimes there's just a natural marker that goes on the grave as well. In a conventional cemetery, like we're used to, perhaps at Mount Feak or at Grove Hill, there's often an upright headstone. There's probably what's called a grave liner or a metal vault below the ground. And for each one of these headstones, these upright headstones, there's also a foundation because the cemetery has promised to take care of these upright headstones basically forever. So by putting a foundation of concrete underneath those memorial markers, they're helping to keep those things upright. It doesn't always happen that it will stay that way forever, but they're making some type of commitment to you to be able to do that. That's not so true in a green or natural cemetery. The soil that is displaced by the casket is placed on top of the grave. Over the next 6 months to 18 months, this will also subside and they'll all be one level of grasses and herbaceous things over this grave. It's possible, depending on the cemetery, that the family may have found a stone at their house or on a hike somewhere nearby, and that stone got engraved perhaps with a name and dates, and that would be placed on top of this mound of soil. And eventually that too might be covered. They're not promising to take care of that forever, but if the family members come back and they clear it off, that's perfectly fine. So in a conventional grave, typically it's at least 6 feet. It could even be 8 feet. The grave marker, these upright markers, probably are not local. They've come from Canada or Vermont or maybe China. Bodies are typically embalmed, although honestly, cemeteries don't know. By the time the cemetery is receiving a body, they're not going to open the casket to check. They don't need to know. All they need to do is put the body in the ground. Caskets could be hardwood, and think about where your casket is coming from. That's what green burial thinks about. You know, is this a locally handmade, soft pine, white pine casket, or is this mahogany? Is this ebony? Where did this come from? And steel and copper have also been used, but why? Are we really trying to preserve the body? No, a green burial is about allowing decomposition to happen organically. A vault of concrete or metal. This is the casket for the casket. Why do we do that? Well, maybe it helps to keep the lawn flat. Funeral directors used to tell people that you're helping to protect the fancy casket as well as the person who's in the casket. Well, that's not really what green burial is about. Green burial is about decomposition. Conventional cemeteries also will use gas-powered equipment, fertilizers, herbicides, and possibly pesticides. The green burial grave site typically might be 3 to 4 feet to the bottom of the grave because it's the upper horizons of the soil where the aerobic conditions are happening, and that helps with the decomposition of the body. Might be a grave marker that is flat, could even be wooden so that eventually it might disappear. Could be a natural habitat with native plants, all biodegradable materials. There still may be some gas-powered equipment, but this example of Pine Grove in Westford, they will be mowing twice a year to keep the woody things down, but allowing the herbaceous things to grow. And if they do want to have some herbaceous pests that they're trying to get rid of, some invasive species is taking over, they might be using an integrative pest management protocol so that they do use a pesticide, but it's at the right time of year where you're not impacting some of the other critters that are using and living off of this landscape. Here's an example on the left of a vault. This vault looks like it's metal, but in fact, it's concrete that's been painted to look like it's metal. And it's in this device, which is called a lowering device, so that the casket will go into this device and down into here, and then this lid will come over here, and then the whole thing will be lowered into the grave versus a natural preparation, which is on the right. We have ropes and a pile of dirt and shovels. All these things are human powered. And this is set up for 6 people to help with the lowering of the casket into the ground. This vault alone is 2,000 pounds. So it requires heavy machinery to put these things into place. Whereas over here, this happens to be Steelman Town in New Jersey. Yeah, human beings dug this grave. It was not done with a backhoe. Although there are places in Massachusetts and in New England that do use backhoes. It's okay to be digging with a backhoe. But these are the two different ends of the spectrum. So I mentioned embalming is not required by law. Many people think it is, but it's not. It does use a formaldehyde-based solution. It's done primarily for cosmetic reasons. And what's really important to understand is the funeral home may have a policy about viewing, and that may say that it has to be embalmed, particularly for a public viewing. And the policy may be influenced by your local Board of Health. So the Board of Health is very important in funeral homes and cemetery work. There could be metal and hardwood caskets. Things like paints do leach over time. So if the more pure the casket or the wicker casket is, the better for the earth. And once again, the concrete, the fiberglass of the plastic vaults, they may help reduce the number of cave-ins, because when you have backhoes going over some of these things, there can be a collapse of the grave. And they can also help to maintain the flat lawn. But it's not always true. I have heard of vaults and even the concrete have degraded over time, and there have been collapses in cemeteries. So the conventional methods also within a cemetery, many of the people who are digging graves have been doing it for 10, 20, 30 years, and they're using these devices, these vaults, because that's the way they always have done it. And that's what they think needs to get done. And they will tell you it's the law. It's probably a bylaw for the cemetery, and bylaws can be changed. The Green Burial Council is a international organization, and they have set standards for defining what's called a hybrid, a natural, and a conservation burial ground. And once again, NewHampshireFuneral.org is keeping track of all the different types of cemeteries across the United States right now. So there's a little less than 500 of these types of cemeteries that she knows about that are being tracked by Lee. But the hybrid burial ground, there's two ways of having a hybrid burial ground. So that is essentially a conventional cemetery that is also allowing natural burial. So this picture on the left is of Pine Grove in Westwood. In the back of this picture, we see upright markers. This is the conventional part of the cemetery. In the foreground, we see a meadow with some clover, and this is the natural section associated with Pine Grove Cemetery. And instead of having individual markers in the meadow, people's names will be inscribed on this large granite block that is a lovely way to memorialize the people. At Mount Auburn Cemetery, they take a different approach. They intermingle the green graves with the conventional part of the cemetery. In this particular case, these flowers represent somebody's grave. These people who are interred on the left-hand side of this path will be memorialized in this granite stone on the right. A natural cemetery does not allow any vaults or grave liners, does not allow embalmed bodies, and it wants the containers to be biodegradable, and maybe there's a marker that will go on top of the grave. Green Springs and Natural Cemetery is outside Ithaca, New York. It's a beautiful lush, lots of meadows with tall grasses and flowers. Cedar Brook is another natural cemetery in Portland, Maine. It was actually a tree farm, and just 2 acres of the tree farm have been set aside for natural burial. Now, there's another thing called a conservation burial ground. And this is basically a natural burial ground that also has a partnership, typically with a land trust organization. So when trying to establish one of these types of cemeteries, a conservation land is the first thing we look for. Is it 20 to at least 50 acres? Is it something worthy of conservation? And oh, if it is worthy of conservation, is there a particular habitat or something that needs to be conserved, in which case there'll be an easement over that critical natural habitat or those special species that need to be protected. And if there's suitable burial grounds on some other part of the parcel, then that is where the burials will happen in conjunction with an easement or a restriction held by the land trust. It's if you were driving by a place like this, you would say, oh, isn't that beautiful? Let's go use the trails. And you could. And oh, by the way, there are burials also on the property. Greenboro, Massachusetts has been working with Kestrel Land Trust out of Amherst for just about 10 years. And we are looking for that naturalistic landscape that we can protect and restore so that it's a sacred sanctuary for green burial. And those of you who know conserved properties, you know what a healing place those can be. Imagine how that would feel if you also had the burial of a loved one on that property. We are still searching for the land, but it's I have my fingers crossed that we might be finding something in the central western edge of Massachusetts. Oh, public safety. I am more dangerous to you alive than dead. So basically, when we die, the things that have killed us have probably died with us. So we don't need to be so afraid of dead people or dead things. Having said that, it is up to the local Board of Health and the Department of Environmental Protection to approve a new cemetery, regardless of if it's on a home burial ground or if it's going to be a green burial cemetery, or if it's going to be a conventional cemetery with embalmed bodies and vaults. You're always looking for good soils. Are they not too wet, not too rocky, not too permeable, not too clay? Is the water depth, at the table at least 10 feet below? And will the local Board of Health be able to approve this because it's not too close to a private well? And the regional DEP office, is it not too close to a public water supply? And right now, those boundaries seem to be about 750 feet from those wells. Greenboro, Massachusetts is maintaining this crowdsourced database. This is an example of what's happening in Northampton. Right now, green burial is not allowed in Northampton. I can tell you in 2014, there were just 3 cemeteries in the state that allowed green burial. We are now up just over 50, I believe. So this is always being updated. I suppose it would be possible to see Northampton or Waltham up on this as potentially allowing green burial in the future. And if you're somebody who would like to volunteer for Greenboro, Massachusetts, we could always use help with people contacting cemeteries, even your local cemetery, to find out if they allow green burial. So let's say you've contacted your cemetery and you found out they're not going to do a green burial for you. You can decide to skip the embalming, but you've got to work with your funeral director, make sure it's okay with the funeral director, particularly if you're going to have a public viewing. You have the option of finding your whatever kind of coffin or casket you want to use. You do not have to buy the ones that your local funeral director provides. And there's something called butter dishing. You know, when you put a dish on top of your butter, there's an idea that some cemeteries are willing to do, which is they dig the grave, they put the casket in the grave, and then they put the vault in, but it's upside down. So it's going over the body. So it's still protecting, it's still supplying what the cemetery believes will be that flat lawn look, and they can drive their heavy machinery over it without fearing too much that it's going to collapse. So those are some options. Now, because we get requests about other things like cremation, something else called alkaline hydrolysis and natural organic reduction, I'm going to just touch on those three things. Cremation by fire. The chambers that burn the body go up to almost 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. That is so tight, that's so hot that the good things in your body are actually bound together. So there will be bone fragments that get pulverized, and that pulverized bone fragment is what is referred to as ash. But there's also the potential for mercury and toxins going up into the atmosphere, particularly if you have silver fillings in your mouth. There's also per cremation about a 600-mile car ride of CO2 is released into the atmosphere. So while it does create a smaller footprint of cremated remains, and those things could be poured into the ground, but you might want to think twice about putting them over your grandmother's rose garden, because they have a very high pH of 9 to 12 of potassium and sodium salts. Alkaline hydrolysis is similar, except it's using water and lye. Even though it's using 80% less energy, it's still 2 to 3 hours to liquefy the soft tissues, which go into a sewer system, and it leaves behind the bones, which are then also pulverized. This is not yet legal in Massachusetts. I think it's going back into the state legislature for this next session, and it may or may not make it, but just to let you know, that could be happening. Likewise, this thing called natural organic reduction. In Washington State, these are pictures of two different options. This one on the top shows basically a shrouded body in this vessel, and it gets covered with straw and wood chips, and it moves into this vessel where it's aerated and rotated. And eventually, over the course of 8 to 12 weeks, the body is decomposed. Remaining bones are also pulverized in this instance. And what you end up with is what looks like a bunch of bark mulch, and it's a small truckload. So imagine, you know, a Toyota Tacoma filled with compost, and that's what you're getting. Even though it's been a single body, it's taken so much plant material that you end up with a lot of stuff left, which can then go on a garden bed for mulching. This also is not yet legal in Massachusetts, but it could be. And so this guy, Walt Patrick, he's also in, he runs Herland Forest, which is a cemetery in, I think it's Eastern Washington State. He has a low-tech version of this where he has these types of vessels. He puts somebody in, and he also fills it with the straw and the wood chips and rotates it. And this cradle also could take 8 to 12 weeks for the body to be changed into compost. So both of those are legal in Washington State. And let's see, it still says 7 other states. And I can't remember exactly what they are. Colorado and California, I think, are at least 2 more. Costs. If you're using a funeral director, and if you're going to a conventional burial ground, those costs tend to be more expensive. So let's say anywhere from $4,100 to $40,000, depending on the cemetery. A place like Mount Auburn Cemetery is very expensive, and they would I think, in fact, the average grave right now at Mount Auburn Cemetery is probably around $25,000. So versus I live out here in Stockbridge in the Berkshires. We give our plots away to taxpayers in town, and we ask for a $500 fee, and then that $500 goes into our perpetual care. So that's certainly a wide range. Flame cremation is about $1,500. Alkaline hydrolysis, about $1,500 to $3,500, depending on what state you're in. Human composting, $55,000 to $7,000. And family-directed funeral. So a funeral director some funeral directors support a la carte services. Perhaps you just need help with transporting the body and the paperwork. By all means, use the funeral director to help you with those things. So we're looking at $2,300 to maybe $5,000. And if you are saving money, you can perhaps cater something or have a party afterwards. So it's really up to you to figure out how you want to use a funeral director. Do you want to use a funeral director? And will the cemetery that you're going to allow you to do it without a funeral director? Not all cemeteries appreciate a family-directed funeral. So you have to speak to people and really work with people. And all of those costs are dependent on location, the cemetery, what services, including, the visitation or viewing that would require potentially embalming. And, are you at a church doing the viewing, or are you at a funeral home doing the viewing? So all these things have an impact on the costs. 10 things you can say or do to promote green burial. Well, some of them are speaking to your cemetery trustees, attending meetings, starting a survey and gathering information from your local community, and tonight's is a perfect example of the land trust is hosting this, and this was a catalyst for all of you in Waltham and your neighboring communities to really have a discussion about, hey, can we get green burial going? And believe it or not, it makes a really interesting discussion to be sitting in a cafe and say, wow, I just went to this presentation about green burial. It's shocking to me how many people really do like to talk about green burial. And resources, the Green Burial Council, the Conservation Burial Alliance. This might be of particular interest to those of you who are land trusters. It's about the conservation cemeteries across the United States. conservationcemeteryma.org. This is something that we are maintaining as we try to figure out where is our conservation cemetery going to be, or at least our first one. Funeral Consumers Alliance has lots of information related to funeral homes and funeral directors. NewHampshireFuneral.org, again, this is where you can find that document, 10 things to say or do to promote green burial. And some Funerary Artisans Collective to get some really fun, different urns or shrouds or whatever it is you want for your final resting receptacle. And two books in particular that we found great, Grave Matters by Mark Harris and Elizabeth Fournier's The Green Burial Guidebook. These are just two things to get you started if you'd like to read more about green burial. And with that, I will stop and come back to you, and we can go over some of the questions.
With the
Wow.
last one, yeah, go ahead, Sonia. I'm sorry.
That's right. I just want to say thank you so much, Candace.
that was
That was
wonderful.
very, very informational, and wow, I'm glad that others have questions in the chat, because I'm still like, wow, this is amazing. And I didn't know, not obviously, I didn't know about a lot of those other things. And wow, that's great. So yes, Diana, there are questions in the chat room, in the chat thing rather. And do you want to go through them?
Start with the last one. Can we have a copy of the slides that we can make available?
Yes, I will send a copy of the slides to Sonia, and she can load them up there with the recording once it gets
Yeah,
up there.
because some of those references you made or would
Yes,
be
yes.
hard for people to have caught. And I think there's one that I don't think I saw, but I think, are there any green cemetery available, even if they're the ones that are part conventional and part green nearby here?
Um, the only one, well, there's two, Mount Auburn Cemetery and Gethsemane over in Brookline and Newton, I think it is. Or Roslandale. I think he's in Roslandale. And I know Mount Auburn is having incredible demand for their green burial grounds, and they would love it if other local cemeteries would start offering green burial. So those of you who are, in that area, call up your local cemetery and ask them and get the conversation going.
They don't have them in Waltham. The three we have are not allowing green
Yes.
burial yet. Okay.
Yes,
Um,
and you can check the bylaws. That's one of the first things I do when I'm going to give a talk in a local area is to check the bylaws for the cemetery, because they're the ones who decide if the vault is required or not. And when I was working at Mount Auburn Cemetery, I looked that up in the minutes, and I found out that it was in the 1940s that they started using the vaults there. And they did it because another cemetery had started doing it. And I think it might have been Forest Hills. And the reason they did it is to minimize labor, because people were going back to top off the grave. So after a body starts decomposing, the grave might subside a little bit. And so as a result of that, labor force had to go back and top it off and perhaps put new seed down for the grass to grow in the spring or the early fall. And they did it as a cost-saving measure. So that was in the 1940s. Out here in the Berkshires, when I moved out to the Berkshires in 2018, I think it was not until the 1980s that they started doing vaults out here. So it's an interesting progression. And now we see that there are many places who are willing to say, oh yeah, we don't really have to do the vaults anymore. So that's why we should have these conversations with our cemeterians.
The first question we have, I think, has been answered, but Greta, if you disagree, somehow raise your hand or put something in the chat again. But that was to explain green burials. You answered the very next moment. Then we have a question from Nora asking, what would be an example of a natural grave marker? Maybe something besides the rock that you mentioned?
Some people might use a log or a piece of wood, because that will also degrade over time. And once again, this is very cemetery specific. Often they'll also have dimensions of it can't expand and go over a certain number of inches. So work with the cemetery to do that. And it's usually something of, value to you. It has some meaning to you and the person who was buried. I've only seen wood and stone. I imagine there could be ceramic or a few other things, but be willing to say goodbye to it.
We got to thank you there. Greta has another one about the transmission. How is the transmission of communicable diseases controlled in green burials, particularly to avoid pollution of groundwater? I think you answered that, but again, if you have an issue with, if you want more, Greta, let me know.
No, let me answer that a little bit more fully. The reason why the public health department and the DEP get involved in the approval of a cemetery is to ensure we're not impacting the groundwater and the water supplies, whether they're private or public. So they're very important to helping us site a cemetery. And it's also important to know that, once we die, most things die with us, with the exception of some prion diseases like Jakob Creutzfeldt disease. And, the CDC and the World Health Organization, those are two organizations that cemeterians look to figure out if there is the next plague. What do we do with those bodies? How do we handle those bodies? Do they have to be cremated? Do they have to be stuck in a body bag? Can they go into the ground? For example, when COVID-19 first started, we didn't know much about it. So people were put into body bags when they died from COVID-19. Natural burial grounds were being requested to bury these people. And the Green Burial Council was getting phone calls and said, oh my God, I'm a certified natural burial ground, a conservation burial ground. Can I put my loved one into the soil? Yes, you can. It does have a heart. It's not this green burial movement. It's about decomposition of the body. And so those things like plastic or a titanium hip or a plate in your head, they'll eventually degrade. They may not decompose the way your flesh and bones will decompose, but it's still important to put those things in the ground as that person wished. So the way that communicable diseases are controlled is really by the good siting of the cemetery.
Are there scientific studies or something available if we have a Board of Health that really, wants to dot their I's and cross their T's?
I can probably get some information, and I'm going to go look at nhfuneral.org to get more information about that. Because actually there's not a whole lot related to studies about that. And what we do have is often related to natural disaster sites, like if there's been an earthquake and there's been a hotel. Well, typically the people who may have died in the hotel, they were probably healthy, but that's the type of stuff that's been reported often in some of the research. So yeah, let me try to get something off to you and Sonia about that.
Thanks.
Question we have is from Pat. She said, I heard of a place out west where you can be laid in a field above ground to decompose. Do you know anything about that?
So what I know about the above ground stuff is related to people who do research on burials and, on bodies and how they decompose. And that's usually associated with forensic science, so that they can figure out, if somebody's been murdered and they're just, left to decay somewhere, they can figure out how long that has been based on what type of critters are going after the body or what shape the body is in. So it's not known as a cemetery, but it's a research place for forensic science. And there are funeral pyres, so built outside funeral pyres in Colorado that are legal. And you might need to be part of that community where that is allowed. So that's another type of outdoor thing where you are above ground, but it is shielded from general public. So general public wouldn't be able to walk by and see this going on.
Question is Pine Grove Cemetery, this is from Donna, in Westford, a totally green cemetery, or does it have a mixed traditional and green? Do you know about one in Westford?
Yeah, so Pine Grove is both a conventional cemetery and a green cemetery next to each other. So they call it a hybrid cemetery. And they used to allow non-residents to be buried there, but now you have to be a Westford resident to be buried there.
Oh. The next question, also from Pat. I have beloved cats that were cremated. What would I be able to have their ashes put with me in a green burial site?
So you didn't hear this from me. If you want your cremated pets to be buried with you, you might want to consider hemming their remains into whatever garment you might be buried with, because in Massachusetts, it's not legal to have your pet and you in the same cemetery.
Right. Um, this is, I'm not sure I understand this question. Can you comment about mushroom suits?
Yes, I can comment about mushroom suits. So the idea behind a mushroom suit is that it's a shroud infused with mycelium. And the thought process when it was designed over 10 years ago was that the mycelium would help neutralize any toxins in the body. It turns out that after research, that was not true. So basically, you would be purchasing an expensive shroud that's been infused with mushrooms. It's a great idea, but it didn't work in reality.
Okay. Uh, oh, what about family members who might wish to be buried at the same place or together?
Yes, so it depends on the cemetery. Often I know of a couple cemeteries right now that will allow couples. So if one member of the couple died, the living member can still be buried next to that person. They don't typically allow for 4 people, but you might be able to manage 4 people depending on the cemetery. So it's up to the cemetery itself as to how they plan their burials. Some places require just a sequential, put one here, do the next one, do the next one, do the next one, in which case you may not be directly next to your loved one. So it really is dependent on the cemetery.
Here's another one from Greta. Can a pine or cardboard casket be filled in a way that will eliminate collapse?
Well, I suppose you could fill it with organic matter of some sort. I don't know of anybody who's doing that. And so there might be a reason why you wouldn't want to do that. And I honestly don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. Okay. I think you already answered that. The Gethsemane Cemetery allows green burials. Is that one of the ones you named?
Yes, it is. So, okay, West Roxbury, right.
Yeah.
I don't know all the details related to what he offers there. So definitely give him a call. I forget his name right now. Lovely man, happy to talk to you.
Somebody's asking for the books, but I think that those are in the slides. So whoever, let's see who
Yeah.
asked, Gail,
Yeah.
you can get it from the slides.
Yeah.
Some,
Elizabeth Fournier and Mark Harris, though. Elizabeth
Okay.
Fournier and Mark Harris were the 2 authors.
oh, Betty McKenzie said that she heard that there was a green burial option in Lexington.
Oh yes, I think Lexington does offer green burial now. I'm not sure if you need to be a resident or not.
Oh, okay. Um, does the burial site, the green burial site, become available for reuse at some point?
Yes, wouldn't that be nice? Right now, the answer is no. In Massachusetts, a grave is only for one person. And unless it's a double death grave, sometimes it would be one person on top of another, and those people have to be related. So it's family members who potentially could be in the same grave. Massachusetts doesn't allow the other option at this point in time for either, like, once the first grave, let's say the first grave has been 50 years, and so there's nothing left but a few bones. You could theoretically push the bones aside and put another burial on top, but right now that's not legal in Massachusetts.
Okay. See, what's the next one? Oh, Have any groups such as the trustees of reservation allowed green burials on their properties?
Yes, and I see the next one also is about conservation land as well. So conservation land is interesting because once in Massachusetts, and those of you who do this kind of work in land trusts, evidently conservation easements have to go up to the state level to get approved. And once it gets approved, it's very difficult to change a conservation easement. And most cases, these things have not been defined so that it allows the burial of a human body. So if you're somebody on this call right now who's got land and you're considering donating it to the Waltham Land Trust or selling it to the Waltham Land Trust, and you also want to be buried on your land, you need to make sure that gets written into the conservation easement that it allows the burial of you, your family, and if, hallelujah, you had 50 acres, you want to have a conservation cemetery as a community asset for the greater Waltham area, oh my goodness, please do that. And make sure the easement allows for green burial to happen on that property.
That going up to the state is only if it's a permanent easement, but anything that trustees buy would be permanent.
Ah,
Or,
okay.
I mean,
And-
a permanent restriction.
Okay,
Okay.
and I can also tell you that the trustees of reservations, as well as Mass Audubon, they are both pro-green burial. And so it really still comes down to finding the right parcel of land.
This one from Eric. Can you grow a tree on a green gravesite?
Yeah, you probably can. Most cemeteries probably won't want you to, but it is possible. And, you know, there used to be this picture of a giant, like egg-like thing with a tree growing out of it, so that theoretically the body was in this egg-shaped thing. That you definitely don't want to do, because if the tree doesn't survive, then somehow you've got to perhaps either dig out the tree or cut the tree down and replant another tree. So it just, it's not nice.
Interesting idea. Um, okay. It's a comment.
Preventing collapse of green burial containers if heavy machinery isn't
Actually,
used,
it's-
perhaps maybe less likely.
Yeah,
Yes, so the collapse may be less likely. However, there's probably still going to be some subsidence. That's cemetery lingo for it's going to dip a little bit. That's because when you dug the grave, you decompacted the soil. So when you're putting the casket back in and you're putting soil on top of that, that mounded soil is going to compact with snow and rain and time. So there could be less likely to have a collapse. And as well, if you're a pine casket, and let's say you're 18 inches, if that 18 inches tall, some of these vaults are like 2 feet or 4 feet. So they're designed to have a larger hole. So if there is a collapse, you're going to fall farther when something is vaulted. So even with a green burial, if there is a collapse because of some type of machinery or something fell in, you're not going to fall as far.
this may be the last question, but how is the body transported to an out-of-state green cemetery?
You need to check. Yeah, I probably would be working with a funeral director to do that. And there are some states that require that the body be embalmed. So I'm afraid I don't know a great answer for you. It depends on what state it's going to, what state you have to drive through. And yeah, yeah, it's harder to do, but I know it is possible. I know one of my colleagues, when her husband died, she transported his body from Massachusetts up to Cedar Brook in Maine and had a natural burial for him up there. So it depends on what state you're going to. And some of that information also might be available through the Funeral Consumers Alliance.
I think We've gotten all through, let me just double check. No, no more new questions.
We
Um,
we do have one
Oh.
more, or at least I see one from Gail. Do these green cemeteries have provisions for grave excavation staff? My family is not able to excavate a grave.
yeah, that
Um,
got out of,
Most cemeteries would prefer to do the digging of a grave themselves. It's a liability issue. The insurer will say, are you crazy? You're gonna have a family member dig a grave? You might find a cemetery that allows it, but for the most part, they don't. And even when you get to fill in a grave, sometimes there might be a waiver that needs to be signed. The family would need to sign to say, yeah, if I hurt my back while I'm filling in the grave, I'm not going to sue the cemetery, kind of thing. So it's usually opening the grave is almost never allowed, and closing the grave is more likely to be allowed.
So it sounds like the big takeaways are case by case basis, talk to your cemetery people, talk to your board of health, and do a little research on your own. But you, Candace, are going to provide us with some resources in the slides, and we can do some more researching. But wow, thank you so much. Are there others who have questions? Want to raise? You can just raise your hand, and we can unmute you. But I think
you can unmute yourself,
yeah,
actually.
you can unmute yourself, whatever. You have the power. Janine.
Yeah, yes, I just wanted to know the question about will the slides be available? Does that mean available at the Land Trust website? Or you're gonna email them out to us, or where are we gonna find these the information?
Let me figure that out, Janine. I'm not exactly positive. Kind of depends on how large they are. I'm not positive. So I will email everybody on the list who signed up and say, this is where the slides are.
Oh, great.
Here's a link to them. And here's where the recording is. The recording will be on YouTube. So the slides, I'm going to have to talk with our tech person to figure out where on the Land Trust website they might live. So stay tuned, but fret not, we will get them to you all because this is definitely good stuff in there. Susan.
Yeah, I arrived late. I'm sorry, I forgot. I put it on my schedule, then forgot. But I have two questions that I put in chat, but it's on the private one and I can't get it off. So my questions are, I have been following a company that produces a thing called a cocoon, which is mycelium, and they say that the mycelium decomposes the body. So I was
And-
wondering about that. And the other question was, if you are a landowner, can you be buried on your own property? Like the old days?
Maybe. So let me first answer that question. If you're a landowner and you want to be buried on your own property, your local board of health needs to be consulted. And what you're supposed to do is fence off, cordon off on your deed and on your property where the cemetery is. And we now understand that the DEP attorneys and the Board of Health attorneys agree that you're supposed to establish a 501c13, which is a private nonprofit cemetery, in order to have a little burial ground on your property. And so that by itself can be a reason why you don't want to do it. But it is possible, but you have some hoops to jump through. And this would then go on your deed. So when you go to sell your house, the real estate agent who's helping you sell the house is going to say, oh, yikes, they have a cemetery on their property. And that's because future generations are going to want to come back and potentially visit your cemetery on your property.
Got it.
So those are some of the things that need to be thought about. The mycelium thing that you're mentioning is not the one I think I talked about earlier. There's some guy in one of the Scandinavian countries.
Yes, in the Netherlands, I think. Yeah.
Okay. And can you remind me what that is? Is it actually
Called-
like a,
It's called a cocoon, and it's a white, like sarcophagus sort of thing that the body is placed in. They put, you can have greens or whatever, and you can be wrapped in linen and whatever, very simply. And the top
Yep.
is put on, and you are buried in a shallow grave. And the mycelium theoretically starts to grow and decomposes the body. Of course, it takes longer to decompose the bones, but that happens as well, at least in the literature.
yeah. I suppose anything's possible. And, for me, green burial is about simplicity, right? So in this case, right, we would now, if it's really happening in the Netherlands, we'd have to write to the Netherlands, have it shipped over here, somehow prepare our bodies to put it there, and then find a cemetery who's willing to bury that thing. So I suppose it's possible, and I would say check all the research and double check it.
Thank you.
Other questions? Last calls for questions?
We got a lot of very nice comments in the questions. If you want to take a quick look at them, Candace, for yourself, but all thank you for doing a very nice job and it very
Well, thank
helpful.
you. It's really been a pleasure talking to everybody and excellent questions. And wow, I hope we can see something happening in Waltham.
Yep. Maria's got a last minute question.
I just wonder if you could put some books somewhere on the website.
If one can put those books on our website
Yeah,
or
or somewhere with this near the slides. I don't
sure.
know the appropriate
I'll-
place, but
We'll see what we can do.
The books
Definitely
are-
they'll be in the slides, the information will be there in the slides, so.
okay.
Yes. I'm just checking.
And I know that one person in the chat did put a link in there, so if you, maybe folks, I just learned this myself. Yeah, Jamie put the link kind of halfway in the chat. So if you go to that big long link, if you look over, there's 3 little buttons there. There's like a thing in the upper right-hand corner that has 3 little buttons on the right-hand side. If you click on that, that says copy. If you copy that link, click copy, and then you've got that link, and then put it in your browser or whatnot. So that's one way to get links from the chat. But we'll do our very best to make it clear so that folks can find those resources, and they'll definitely be in the slides that we'll make available
Yes.
to folks too.
Yes. And I'll probably produce 2 slides per page, so they will be legible to you. And so you can see the titles of the books there.
Candace, are those books on the Green Burial Massachusetts website?
I just checked and I didn't see that we had books there. They might be in one of our PDFs. So if I find a better resource list, I'll also share that with you.
Thank you. Your slides will be great. Thank you. Thank you. All right.
Lots of-
Everyone says many things. I'm going to stop recording. Thank you.